joke.
Okay. Here's a bad joke, and hopefully everything after that will be better. My favorite bad joke ever. 2 goldfish are in a tank. One goldfish turns to the other one and says, "You know how to drive this thing?"
That was actually pretty good.
I'll have to send that one to my son.
Damn it.
It is just about 5 after.
Okay. We good to go?
She's
I've been filming for 2 minutes already, so.
Thank you, everybody, for attending this presentation. My name is Scott Wilson, or S. Michael Wilson, depending on which thing you read. And the title of this presentation is Uncomfortable Chairs to Create a Journey. As pretty much most of you are, all of you are aware, for the BFA students at Goddard, one of the requirements is a critical context paper. It's kind of like a literary research paper about you as a writer and your influences and why you write what you write. So instead of just reading from my senior project, I thought I'd kind of turn this into a pseudo-critical context paper and explore my own journey as a writer from age 4 to 41. So we'll be going over just history of what I've done and why I do it. And at the end, I'll read a segment from my senior project, which is a novel in progress called A Series of Uncomfortable Chairs. So, I got a couple of quotes throughout this from Leo Roston. He was an academic who was also well known for his humorous writing in journalism, screenplays, and short stories. Every writer is a narcissist. This does not mean that he is vain. It only means that he is hopelessly self-absorbed. I've always felt that readings were a bit narcissistic for writers, because it's kind of like just getting a bunch of people together and saying, "Look what I did." But there's a level of narcissism there. But I've always felt that it's an introspection as well as information or communication, and so that's why it's kind of a positive narcissism. Oops. My first memory ever is of sitting in a stairwell looking at the pokey little puppy. When I say my first memory, it's not necessarily the first memory that I still remember. I remember actually realizing at that point that this was my first memory, which is creepy. So it's always stuck with me. And in this memory, I was sitting in the stairwell around the age of 4, looking at the pokey little puppy, not really being able to read. What I specifically remember is I wasn't really trying to read the words in the book, but I was staring at this angular scribble along the bottom and side of the cover. Looking back, it's obvious that I was the one that had scrawled in this book, trying to emulate writing. And it's kind of a poetic moment for starting my memory as a person, because it involves reading as well as writing, as well as trying to gain knowledge from my own writing. So my first memory is critical context. So and the whole idea of curiosity being a negative also comes into play too. I could spend a whole hour just listing all the things I've read and the things I like to read, but I just wanted to go over my evolution as a reader as far as what I was attracted to or why. So, just to run down some of the ideas. Childhood reading, I read a lot of stuff that was a little bizarre, Roald Dahl, that kind of stuff. Daniel Pinkwater kind of sticks in my mind. He wrote a lot of bizarre stuff. My favorite book was a young adult novel, which is about a group of young Dadaists in a middle school that begin to worship a new transfer student and try to make this happen. Daniel Pinkwater has been quoted as saying that the reason that all of his books have different spellings of his name with initials and stuff is that he's purposely trying to upset librarians. So I was attracted to that. When I would make trips to the library as a young child, I would just pick books based on the covers, and so I picked up Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy once, which was a bit outside of my reading level. So at an early age, I was introduced to this level of cynicism and dark sarcasm and social commentary in science fiction, and Douglas Adams has always been a strong influence in my writing and my worldview ever since then. Anybody who's not familiar with it, the basic story of the first book is Arthur Dent, human, escapes the Earth as it's destroyed to make way for a hyper bypass, and then spends his time bouncing around the galaxy just with all these different planets and aliens that kind of mimic the bad social ideas.
No.
Just don't bump the camera.
Sorry.
My documentary. Speaking of reading above my age group, one time, somewhere around 7 or 8, I was at my uncle's house and I was bored, and someone said, "Just go to the bookshelf and pick up a book." So created The Destroyer, the first one of the line of the Destroyer novels, which is an adult men's adventure novel about government assassins, a lot of sex, violence, death, gore. Between that and reading Stephen King and books like that, I'm not the only kid at that age reading Stephen King, but I did have a lot of experience with these darkly cynical books as well, dark humor and Stephen King stuff, and that kind of came into play. Later on in my years, when high school, I got involved in comic books. That was when comic books kind of exploded. And as more acknowledged now than it was back in the 80s, the comic books are a lot more than just superheroes running around in tights. There's a lot of philosophical quandaries involved in there, social issues, things like that. Watchmen, one of the examples. I also got more into conspiracy theories. Illuminatus trilogy is a work of fiction by Robert Anton Wilson and Robert Shea. Involves vast conspiracies around the JFK assassination, rock bands, the Dental Association, far-reaching conspiracies. Robert Anton Wilson became an influence on me as well. He also wrote a lot of books about New Age spirituality and psychology, and that kind of opened the doors to me in looking at things like not only just conspiracy theory, but looking at sociology and psychology and why we think and react the way we do. I also got more into true crime in my high school years, which was also an offset of conspiracy theory. The Ultimate Evil, the one I have up here, is a great little book that explains how David Berkowitz, the son of Sam killer, was actually framed by snuff film pornographers that were linked to Charlie Manson. So that's great reading right there. And as I got into more contemporary fiction and classical works, Kurt Vonnegut, which I've always felt is an extension of Douglas Adams in some regards, with his dark cynicism and leaning towards sci-fi, he was a strong influence on me as well, especially God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater is my favorite book of his. It's also the only book, I also wrote a paper on that. It's the only paper I wrote in my college career in English that got less than an A. So, it was a B, so it's not that bad. Speaking of literary influences, you got a couple of offshoots of literary influences, other types of media. During my high school years, I also got deeply into role-playing games and movies. Role-playing games, people are familiar with, but less than a game or demonic influence, depending on what you believe. Role-playing games were, in its essence, collaborative storytelling. And so learning about characterization through playing with other people, writing adventures, things like that, really got me more into how to structure storylines and how to create diverse characters and actually think like them. And with movies, I wrote a paper for Goddard on Gincata, probably the first classic paper ever written on Gincata. And that led to
Maybe the
bad
only.
films. And so again, I was the first generation of children to grow up with 24-hour cable in the house and access to rental videos. So it's the first generation of kids to really have nonstop films. And I feel that the film influence also helped as far as my writing, or just how I thought of stories and characters, things like that. Another Leo Roskin quote, a writer writes not because he's educated, but because he is driven by the need to communicate. Behind the need to communicate is the need to share. Behind the need to share is the need to be understood. I had other environmental influences on my writing and my reading. As a child, I had asthma for up until my teenage years. Very difficult to do any kind of physical activities, so I spent a lot of time reading because of that. Also, in my, I'd say, elementary school through high school, I was also the victim of severe bullying. Not the only person that's ever had that experience. But that kind of led me to a lot of introspection, isolation, and that kind of influenced my reading and my writing both in a reactionary and in a proactive sense. I tended to escape into reading somewhat, and also it also helped. It also guided me towards more violent writing in some regards, as far as horror stories, things like that, cathartic sense, and me working out my issues that way, and that influenced what I did, and also led to things like questioning roles in society, behavior, moral, ethical ambiguities, things like that, and really got me on the track to trying to solve complex issues like that in my writing or my reading. I wasn't a good student in high school, and one of the reasons is I got bored with anything I wasn't interested in, and I would just do what I wanted to do. What you're seeing here is the book cover to my history textbook in the first year. I quickly found out that if you were writing in a notebook during class, and the teacher found out it was something that you weren't supposed to write, they would take the notebook away. If you're writing on your textbook, they just leave it. So I would get a plain white textbook cover and just write, this is specifically as a novel, a short story about a cowboy catching a demon train, something like that. Never finished. But that's just an example of what I would do instead of actually studying. I would write short stories in high school. Here's two examples I still have on file. Gives a kind of idea where my mindset was. On the left, you'll see the Lizard Lady Chronicles, one of a two-part series. I never got farther than that. I was very popular with English teachers except for one, and I don't know why I called her the Lizard Lady. It might have something to do with changing hair color at the time. I don't remember. But in this specific passage here, I expose her as a demon to the class, and she starts killing all the students. There's a lot of stuff here where I'm surprised I was never advised for psychological evaluation. Actually, shocked, yes. But again, a lot of acting out and trying to deal with conflict. A lot of horror, a lot of violence there. Acting out in that manner. On the left, there's the Future Gods of Remedius High, which never made it past 5 or 6 pages, but it was about Greek gods, demigods in high school, or God high school, what have you. And here I was trying to sort out spirituality, religion, and in a high school setting, I'm writing what I know. So these are some examples of things I would be writing during school, computer lab, and probably English, maybe.
Math class, it's like this math.
Oh, math problems. That could be that. And then Locker 666. So nice to change. Again, not surprised. No psychological evaluation. This was about a school that was trapped in a bubble by some demon, and it turned 80% of the students into demons, and the other students have to escape. This is my first attempt at writing a screenplay with very poorly structured, obviously, definitely not standard format. And but I was playing the ideas of setting scenes and telling a story. And the characterization was kind of complex. I had 18 main characters, and I kill off a bunch through it, and there were only 4 survivors at the end. There's actually a sequel plan that took place in hell, which I never wrote. But I was following through with outlining entire stories. I was getting more into characterization, and it was becoming, while you still had violence involved, it was becoming more fanciful and less directed at individuals, maybe. Once again, no psychological profiles for Scott in high school, but my first English term paper was on the Zodiac Killer. So I handed in a term paper with a poem written by the killer on a school desk, a drawing of him, and the symbol he used to leave behind with his victims. The term paper was really just a listing of his mode of operations, things he left behind, psychological evaluations, things like that. I got an A on it. and this was an example where I was really taking any assignments I didn't want to do, and the citations, by the way, horrible, looking back at this. And I was just turning these, use my creativity to make things I didn't want to do more fun. Poetry. If you don't read the poetry. Only there is an example. I had no real exposure to true poetry growing up. My first introduction to poetry was the poetry in Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Vogon poetry, which is so bad it's used for torture. And
Wait, is that true?
in the book, yes. Yes, and they didn't really have a formal poetry training in the school. And as far as I remember from this class, they just had us read a few Shakespeare poems that, okay, now write 3 poems. That was the assignment. So the story behind this is we were told we had to write 3 poems, 1 a day. It came in the first day, and I handed in Dance of the Fetus. The teacher read it over. It's okay. That's okay, that's good. Hand one tomorrow. Came back the next day, handed in the Tattooed Fetus. I would read an excerpt of this, but you don't want to, really. And the English professor looked at that and said, okay, you're trying stuff, your wordplay here. What's the 3rd poem you're going to write? Revenge of the Fetus is part 3 of the trilogy. So I'll make you a deal. If you don't write that, I'll pass you on these 2 poems. I never returned to finish the trilogy. You're welcome. I also joined the school newspaper. I'm going to read an excerpt from it. Once again, I realized, I thought, I like writing, I'll get into journalism, and I quickly realized I didn't like writing about things I had no interest in. One of the few times I really got to write what I wanted to was when they would do the April Fool's issue of the student paper. This is my favorite article I wrote for the school paper. It was the additional edition to be added to the new edition. The school had a history of 1 building being turned into 2 at a certain point, and then they added a new edition, and so I ran with that. And this was kind of showed how I was really getting into satire and humor and how wordplay was involved. And I'm going to take a stab at reading an excerpt from this, just the middle section. Each building will now be identified by their age in comparison to the other 2 buildings in reference other than themselves. Under this new system, the new addition to the old new addition of the old new building will be the new old new addition. The older counterparts of the newer addition of the old new addition, that is the old new addition to the old new building, will be the old new old building addition. And the original new addition, new building, that is the older third of the newly added addition to the older new addition of the old original new addition, will be the old new addition building.
Brilliant.
All right, bear with me on this. I'm going to try to get this in one shot. Under these new titles, it will be increasingly easy to explain to freshmen of 1995 that in order to reach the upper lower middle floor of the new old edition from the highest bottom floor of the middle of the old new old edition, one need only take the second ramp available from the 3rd stairwell of the 2nd floor of the old new old building addition to the 3rd floor of the 1st stairwell of the old new addition building, crossing over to the 4th stairwell on the 2nd floor landing to return to the 1st stairwell of the basement upper level of the old new old building addition, and following that to the 3rd floor of the old new addition building, where the secondary original ramp of the old new old new addition building connection, not to be confused with the connecting old new addition building, old new old building addition original secondary ramp, will lead them right to the second lower middle floor of the 1st secondary stairwell of the new old new addition, thus making it much easier to get from driver ed to home ec in under 4 minutes. The school had just started a video version of the school newspaper that year, and they made me read this. So there's that. Let's see what's next. Also, in my first movie review ever was printed in the school newspaper. The school had a restriction that you could only review something that was PG-13 or lower. At the time, the only 2 new releases were Necessary Roughness or the Vanilla Ice film Cool as Ice. So I was lucky enough to write my first film review ever about a bad movie. This is why I now do a podcast specifically on reviews for bad films. I'm not going to read anything from that. Has anybody seen Cool as Ice?
The movie was classic.
I stand corrected. Outside of school, I started getting more into doing more than just writing. And along with a couple of people at the comic store I used to hang out at the time, Metropolis Comics, where role-playing games would be involved as well as the comic books, we produced 1 issue of the Gothic magazine, which was a film fan magazine. And it was my first experience doing layout and getting work from other contributors and self-publishing it, getting it out to people. I think I sent out to copies to 10 different people. It was a wide release. I still have the originals. But it was a great first experience for us. And I wrote some articles in there that I would later go back and revisit and revamp and have published elsewhere, including a lengthy review of the dream sequence in Layer of the White Worm. Anybody? No. From this, let me see where I am here. After high school, I also continued to write, and taking my journey into self-publishing, in the 80s and 90s, before computers were too prevalent and blogging didn't exist, you had the zine revolution where people just print their own zines, newsletters on, go to Kinko's and print them out, or do chapbooks like that and send them out to people. I published my own run called The Mongoloid Moose. It was a human zine for about 36 issues, around 3 years. The title was a combination of my idea to do something with the Ramones song Mongoloid and my friend Gerard Way, who said I should call it Moose Fuck. This was my common ground. It has a stupid list on its first issue, 100 uses for a living severed head. And it was a humor zine that really became more of kind of a blog. I wrote a lot of personal stuff. There was a lot of creative nonfiction involved, as well as creative fiction. And I also wrote just about things going on in my life. Everything from working at the Miss America pageant, trying to break into the film industry, which I later decided I didn't want to do, and things like the OJ trial, things that were happening at the time, expressing thoughts and emotions. And it was really, it's kind of like a blog / diary, but in a humor zine format. As it progressed, I got more into layout that wasn't just typing on a paper and writing in the margins. I even had somebody request an issue be made specifically as a party favor, for a wedding favor. So that was actually distributed at a wedding. And then the final issue was, I was getting into desktop publishing on computers, working with layout, format. And it was my evolution of just understanding not just how to write, but how to present it, how to seek out audiences. At the peak of its run, it was around 150, 200 people subscribing. And I found out recently, just Googling the names and stuff, that issues of it are archived at the University of Montana in their small zine press collection. So I have yet to make a pilgrimage out there to look at my old issues, but it's nice to know that somebody kept them. You can see on the left, I'm somewhere between Moldy Bagels and Monkey Manifesto. So mine was not the worst name in the bunch. After high school, I also took some screenwriting classes at the New School. That was the only kind of formal education I did until I went back to college in my mid-30s. This is the first screenplay I ever wrote based on official formatting, and the first screenplay I ever handed in as an assignment. It's a short play about JFK and Abraham Lincoln meeting in a bathroom before they're both assassinated. It's kind of fun. I loved the fact that my teacher had pre-made stamps on the errors and everything. Because it really, at first I was appalled, but then it communicated to me that I'm not the only one making these mistakes. And this is before computer programs were very popular for formatting your screenplay for you, so all you have to worry about is tabbing over and writing the next thing. From that point on, I did a lot of self-teaching screenwriting through Zoe Cho website. What's the time?
8:28.
Oh, then I'm going to skip past this. But I did a lot of screenplay writing. I learned how to critique others and take criticism from other people. Then I finally started getting published. My main success with publishing was in nonfiction, film review. This is a book I edited and co-wrote. Monster Alley is just a collection of articles on old comic books, movies, magazines in the horror genre. I went on to publishing my own book on Bela Lugosi. I had an article in an anthology of horror film essays, and I wrote the foreword for the reprint of the Jack the Ripper novel based on the film from 1957. There's a lot of Jack the Ripper movies. So that really got me going on realizing that I should do something with my writing. Also, around the same time that I published Monster Alley, I also lost my job of 15 years, my girlfriend of 10 years, and it came down with the swine flu. So combined, it's like, I need a change. And so I decided to go back to school, start my career again, and after meeting Professor Warden Bradford at Warren County, who bum rushed me into joining the creative writing program, they really showed me that I should be doing something with it and trying to make a career out of it instead of just doing that on the sideline. Humor is the affectionate communication of insight. Leo Rossman again. I've always gravitated towards humor, even in my horror writing, even in the stuff that was cathartic. Coming to Goddard, I've made a lot of advancements, I feel, in my personal writing, and a lot of it was towards writing more serious, more straight literature. But even in those serious pieces, there is a bit of humor there. It's always been a part of me. And, you know, I'm not a lot of reasons why. It might be reactionary, maybe a defense mechanism. But really, I just enjoy, you know, having fun and sharing that. And so while I'm trying to steer my writing towards more serious works, there's always an element of humor in there, because really everything's a little bit funny when you look at it. I'm now going to read an excerpt from my novel that, in progress that was handed in as my senior project, a series on Uncomfortable Chairs. It's the story of a middle-aged software trainer who travels to conventions and trains people on software, and during one 4-day excursion to Atlanta, experiences an existential midlife crisis and seeks out advice from an alcoholic salesman and an angry clown, and doesn't really manage to cope with anything. Semi-autobiographical, a little bit. So I'm going to read an excerpt now from One Less. It's called the excerpt's called One Less Open, and in the novel here, the main character Kinsey is at a diner, and an argument nearby over cheese on a Western omelet launches him into a flashback from his childhood that he had forgotten. In this flashback, he and his family are on a road trip for a summer vacation, and tempers flare when they stop at a rest area. As this excerpt starts, there it is. As this excerpt starts, the father is tracking down the mother and Kinsey, who have both disappeared in the rest area and have not come to the point where they're supposed to reconnoiter and get back on the road. There are footnotes in the book, and I will be stopping to read the footnotes. So it might pause a little bit, but it's intended, so bear with me. He found Kinsey first, 5 minutes beyond the scheduled meeting time. Kinsey had been playing with the hot air hand dryers in the bathroom, spinning the elbow-shaped blowers upward and thrusting his face into the screaming jet of heat. 1 minute he was squinting into the black tunnel of the hand dryer, his hair leaping up from his forehead as he tried his hardest to breathe back into the blower, mimicking the noise with a deep R, in between giggles. The next minute he was being dragged by his wrist behind an angry dad in search of his other deserter. Footnote. While the events that transpired shortly after would be forgotten for decades, this particular moment would remain at the forefront of Kinsey's mind as one of the happiest moments in his childhood. Mom was discovered next to the big hand crank machine that charges you 4 quarters to flatten a penny with an impression memorializing your trip to the service area. She had already pressed the images of an eagle, an American flag, and the shape of West Virginia with the name of the state across it on 3 now uselessly thin and ovoid pennies, and was in the process of disfiguring a 4th coin with the image of a black bear, playing with its cubs when Dad approached from the opposite side of the machine. Footnote. The black bear was declared the state animal of West Virginia in 1954 based on a poll conducted by a Division of Natural Resources, condemning future residents of West Virginia to a state animal based not on a geographical or ecological importance, but instead on the lack of creativity demonstrated by the majority of the state. No words were exchanged, but Dad's impatient glare was met and held by Mom's steady, defiant stare as she slowly, ever so slowly, finished the last 2 rotations of the big crank handle, not even blinking until the imagined silence of the bustling souvenir shop was broken by the tiny plink of the flattened black bear penny dropping into the return tray. Not a word was spoken as they made their way across the parking lot into the second-hand Renault Encore. They had been gone long enough for the late afternoon sun to bake away the last of the residual air conditioning they had left trapped in the car, which Dad somehow indicated was the fault of Kinsey and Mom with a prolonged stiffening of his shoulders. They all shut their doors and settled in as Dad started the car and cranked the AC to battle the newly heated interior. As everybody adjusted themselves and basked in the refreshing Arctic air blasting from the dashboard, Mom opened and closed the passenger side door again with a sharp thud. Dad froze. What was that? He asked the question without turning his head away from the steering wheel, which from the back seat was quite unsettling to young Kinsey. What was that? What was what? With the door. I don't know what you're talking about. The door. You opened and shut it again. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was closed properly. You weren't sure. No. You couldn't remember if you had shut the door. That's not what I said. I said that I wasn't sure if the door had closed properly. Because suddenly you're inexperienced at opening and closing car doors. Dad was still looking straight ahead, even though Mom's head was pointed right at him. Why, Mom asked, are you making such a big deal over me shutting the door again? Because now your door is one less open. One what? One less open. So there's a cutoff for how many times I can open the door? Every car door has a finite number of opens, and you just wasted one of yours. That doesn't make any sense. Car doors do not have a limited number of opens. It makes perfect sense. Dad finally turned and faced Mom. We do not live in a magical world of make-believe. Things do not last forever. There is friction and entropy and degradation and decay, and everything that exists only has a certain amount of physical interactions it can take until it ceases to function properly. These are universal laws of physics at play here. Every door has a limited number of times it can be opened and closed before it no longer functions properly. And now your door has one less open than my door because you couldn't remember the sound a properly closed door makes. I know exactly what sound a closed car door makes. It sounds like this. Mom opened and closed the door again, shutting it with a more force this time so the thud was louder. Cute. Keep using that door's opens, and you know what's going to happen if the car suddenly skids off the road and rolls into a pond? I'll be able to get out of the car and swim to safety because my door still has opens left. That's right, selfish. Here you are, flapping your door open and shut like you're trying to fan the pavement, using up all its opens and making me a widower. Footnote. Widower was one of those words that had never made sense to Kinsey. If a widow was a woman whose husband had died, then adding a suffix er, which typically designates a person's occupation, characteristic, or action, should reasonably mean that a widower was somebody that causes someone to become a widow, and not merely the male equivalent of a widow. Having only a partial grasp of the contradictions and inconsistencies in the grammatical laws ruling the English language at the time, young Kinsey was somewhat confused as to why his mother's death by drowning would motivate his father to run around killing other people's wives. You think it's fair that your son has to grow up without his mother because she couldn't figure out how the car door works? Don't you drag your son into your little world of madness. Nobody's going to die because I closed the car door a few more times than you did. You remember that when you're at the bottom of the lake trying to breathe water because you'd rather turn your half of the car into a death trap rather than to admit I'm right. I'll be sure to do that. Yeah, I'll even write it on the inside of the windshield in lipstick before my lungs give out. He was right. One less open. Maybe I'll put on my tombstone as a warning to others. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Yes. I'd love to drown at an early age in a late model foreign import and then be openly mocked on my tombstone. I'm pretty sure I listed that under future ambitions in my high school yearbook. I don't doubt that for a minute. But I can't do it. I can't let you destroy this family out of spite. Dad shifted his seat, and after a dramatic pause, opened and closed his door twice, slamming it shut each time hard enough to make a window rattle. There. Now we both have the same number of opens. Oh my God. Mom gasped in mock horror. What have you done? Now you'll drown with me. There'll be nobody left to survive and spread my cautionary tale. It had to be done. I've already made enough sacrifices just so I can grow old and gray with you, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend my retirement alone. I'd rather condemn myself to water and grave than give you the satisfaction.
Wow.
This was followed by a moment of silence and glaring and wordless accusations before Mom spoke next. You know what? If this is what it's going to be like with you, this kind of attitude I can look forward to in my golden years, I don't think I'll want to survive our next underwater car accident. With that, she opened and closed her car door again, which he responded to by doing the same. The next few minutes seemed to go on forever for young Kinsey, who silently witnessed the escalation of the argument into a cacophony of slamming doors. The repeated concussions in the enclosed space caused by the doors opening and slamming shut became increasingly deafening in the depths of the back seat. And both parents added to the noise, punctuating the slam with angry shouts of, "Well, let's open!" The car rocking side to side in the momentum of the slamming doors, Mom and Dad found a sort of rhythmic unity in their battle of It all finally came to a head when Dad leaned over Mom's lap and opened and shut her door and yelled, "Fine, you die first! See you right there!" She made the move to lean over Dad's lap to do the same, but he shifted the blocker from his door, and she finally ceded the argument with a shrug of her shoulders, a flutter of her hands, and whatever, let's just go. The interior of the car was still warm and muggy, and the first 15 minutes of the final 2-hour drive to the hotel was physically and mentally stifling. No words were spoken the entire way, and both tempers and temperatures cooled considerably by the time they pulled into the parking lot at the Easy Sway Motor Lodge. Things almost took a turn for the worse again, though, when Mom and Dad found young Kinsey unwilling to get out of the car. At first they thought he was upset about watching them argue, but the truth that eventually came to light was that Kinsey had spent the entire ride to the hotel obsessing over which of the rear car doors had been opened more. Not only was he now completely unsure of which door to try first if Dad drove the car into a lake, which now seemed like an inevitability, but he couldn't decide which door was the safest one to open without taking away too many of its opens. He was frozen with the fear that either choice would lead to his future drowning, and so he just sat in the center of the rear bench seat with the full intention of taking his meals back there for the rest of his life, or at least until Dad drove into a duck pond and killed them all. Mom was quicker to pick up on the problem, as most moms are, and she diffused the situation by convincing Kinsey to roll down the window and climb out the car that way. They could have just as easily opened the door from the outside, of course, but by that point, even Mom and Dad were a little spooked by the whole ordeal. They let him sleep in the same bed with them that night, and everybody was in good cheer when they left the hotel the following morning in search of fast food breakfast meals and styrofoam travel trays. The incident was not mentioned for the remainder of the trip, and nobody opened a car door unless it was absolutely necessary. Now it's the customary question and answer session, if anyone would like to ask me the question.
I got one.
I'm going to go here first, because you make fun of lists.
And Mongolian moose, is that what?
Mongoloid moose.
Mongoloid moose?
Yeah.
I saw one of the issues, cost was $1 a trade or
a dollar a trade or anything cool stuffed into an envelope.
anything.
I got a lot of cool stuff in envelopes.
That's essentially my question. What was the coolest?
The coolest thing I got was somebody sent me the needle that was used to pierce her tongue, which I still have somewhere. It was in a cork. It was safe. Mostly people would send me also Jack Chick tracts were a popular one too. Little religious pamphlets. I got a lot of those.
Subliminal messages.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Mostly trading with a lot of people that are doing zines. Evil Cheese was when I traded with regularly. Rubber Duck. What's So magazine, things like that. It's more other humor zines, artists kind of thing.
I noticed on the edition article that.
Oh, I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, I was
Yes.
thinking of that name.
Thank you. I was rushing at that point, so I skimmed over some things I wanted to mention. That was the first time I ever used a pseudonym. I used the name Shipman Mallard, which was the name of a real person that I had heard, and I immediately adopted it. And I actually wrote a short story called The Further Adventures of the Duck, which is about a violent comedian whose face looks like a duck when he doesn't wear his glasses. And the whole story is basically he holds a bad. He's drunk. He gives a bad comic routine, and then he beats up a bunch of hecklers in the alley at the end. Yeah.
Did the real Shipman Mallard ever find out that you?
I never met the real Shipman Mallard. I met them through. I heard about them through somebody else. So, and the story was never published, so I don't think so.
I really commend this story, just the overarching story of your experience into writing and those different influences starting from childhood. I'm actually doing something similar next semester in my senior presentation, and I thought that was really dope. Being able to trace that back.
Well, it's weird. The only reason I really did it in the first place is that I wanted to tell the abortion poetry story. Because I love that story. and I started digging through my old files and found I had saved all the stuff I wrote in high school, like all these the stuff I didn't show you. But and it was weird to go back and look at this stuff, and then I never really thought of myself as prolific in any sense. And again, a lot of stuff wasn't finished. But looking back at the amount of stuff I was writing just to pass the time, even before I got to like zines and newsletters and self-publishing and publishing, it really just surprised me what the progression was. And it really, a lot of it I thought of too doing the critical context paper. When you really look at what your influences are, it's kind of hard to ignore all the stuff you were doing and how far you've come. I came along a lot in the first in the year and a half here, and just looking at that segment as opposed to the rest of my life, it's bewildering a little bit.
Can you elaborate on, like, you mentioned these feelings of like weird, just kind of looking back on reflecting on those writings over
Just
three decades.
thinking out things I was surprised I wrote, and I find looking back at old stuff I wrote, the two things that I'm always shocked with is one that I was the stuff that like I kind of predicted what I was going to be into. So you just look at things back then. I was like, but why was I even into that back then? I don't remember anything doing that. And it's weird to read stuff back then and not only wonder why I would even be motivated to do that, but occasionally hitting one thing like, that's brilliant. Yeah, underline that one. I'll use that again.
Can you tell us more about the title? A series of them.
Oh yeah, this is when I say this is semi-autobiographical, it was originally I was inspired by it when I was traveling as a software trainer to Atlanta to work at a convention, and I was I'm a large guy, and I really have a problem with airplane seats, and the seats at these conventions are horrible. The seats, so at one point I explained to somebody, I said, you know what, my life is just a series of uncomfortable chairs. And that and a couple other thoughts I had during that one trip stuck, and I started forming the idea of I'd never really thought of a novel-length idea for a book, or a novel, that really connected with me, or I really felt like I had enough material to fill it. And this really struck home, because not only was it something that had a lot of potential from the ideas I had, but in it I'm really writing about myself. In it, the character is loosely based on myself, and so I'm actually dealing with inner demons involving existentialism, meaning of life, purpose, direction, all these things, but doing it in a comical format and with a character that increasingly becomes less like me. And the worst thing about writing a book that's loosely based on yourself is that I don't have a happy ending for this. And so I'm plotting it out and think, oh, this is how it ends.
Rude.
But at that point, it'd be like cheating if I just changed the ending to make myself feel better.
Is your father really obsessed with car door openings?
No, not my father. But my girlfriend's father had a similar argument. Yes. That I elaborated upon. And there's, I think as writers we tend to do that a lot. We overhear conversations, we see things, we do things, and we decide we're going to inject that and extract more out of it. And there's a lot of this in the book. I would say 50% of it is based on either something I've done or wanted to do or witnessed. And being able to take those and just say, okay, not to belittle it, but just say what if, or why not, or why, and just play with that. It's not only introspection, but it's communication and trying to solve your own problems. And so I think it's one reason why the book's really clung to me and why I'm really making headway with finishing it. Anybody else?
What are your next steps besides finishing the book? What are your goals post-graduation?
Possibly MFA. I'm looking into different programs for that. I'm trying to get a book of bad movie reviews completed based on the podcast I host. Try to do a bit more of that. And I'm really trying to get more of my short stories published. And since the abortion poetry, I have actually started writing real poetry, and I'm really looking forward to it. Now I deal with more contemporary subjects like cats having sex on car hoods or dick candles. I'm mature a lot.
What's a dick candle?
Huh?
Did you say dick candle?
Candles shaped like that, yeah. I've come a long way since abortion. Yes?
What's the name of your podcast?
Oh, Movie Sucktastic. It's on iTunes, and we have a new website up, moviesucktastic.com. We also do one called Strangers in a Strange Land. That's like a cultural thing, but that's kind of an offshoot we just do to annoy ourselves. But Movie Sucktastic's out there. iTunes, you'll find it. Yes?
What's the greatest gift you think that you has given you?
Greatest gift? It entertains me. I think even with films, as a kid and growing up, the only thing I like more than watching a film that I enjoy that really makes me feel good is making somebody else watch it. And this is kind of what I do in writing, is that I write stuff that really entertains me, and then I make other people read it and hope they get as much out of it as me. That's the real gift from it. There's a lot of psychological value in writing and stuff too, but that's the main enjoyment I get from it, is having people laugh along with me. Is that it? Anybody else?
What's the name of your blog? Do you have a blog as well as a podcast?
There's a blog. I have my own personal blog. It's called Scott's Brain Meat. But I just more of a personal blog thing. It's not really the podcast is the main thing. That's the thing I really push because we're on episode 169 or 170. Yeah. I recommend the Jaws 3D episode. It's one of my favorites.
Sharknado.
No, because
that's TV. Yeah.
Well, that and also it's a bad movie that's trying to be bad. The best bad films are the ones that were really trying to be good. Yes.
I'm sure you get this all the time, but what's the worst bad movie ever?
Gymkhana. Gymkhana is the standard for bad films. I mean, a lot of people will point to The Room or Plan 9 from Outer Space or the Torgo film, Manos, the Hands of Fate. But Gymkhana, as far as like a mainstream theatrical release where money was put into it, advertising was put into it, this was supposed to be something. You had an Olympic gold medalist starring as an action hero, and it's so god-awful. We used to do bad movie days where we would invite people over to watch bad movies. We had to stop doing it because everybody would want to leave halfway through. They didn't get it. Our first one was with Gymkhana, and we had like 15 people crammed into this basement watching this film, and after about half an hour, like somebody said, so we don't have to finish this, right? This is like, that was just like, no, that's the point of it. That's how bad it is. You just don't want to finish it.
Sit in this uncomfortable chair and watch this movie.
It doesn't get better than that.
Where does glitter fall on your list?
Pardon?
Where does glitter fall on your list?
It's not, that's one that's not really that bad. It's just like not my genre, I guess. Oh, wait. Glitter, I'm thinking of a different film. I haven't seen Glitter yet. Never mind.
You're doing yourself a disservice as a bad movie connoisseur.
There's only so much I can do.
Fair enough.
You're more into horror and
no, not necessarily. But genre films tend to have more potential to be bad because they're more exploitation and they're really looking for a quick fluff. So that's always there's more fodder there. Especially if you go into like the 70s and 80s. That was the 80s was that's when they all came out. That's when
there was
you had video rentals were out, and they weren't just making films for theatrical. They're, okay, get it in theaters, and we'll make our money on video. That was the beginning of it. I mean, you see that with streaming now, but the 80s was the first time to like, just give me 10 million, we'll get it, put a name on it. The biggest, like Vamp, there's a movie Vamp about vampires made in the 80s. The story behind that was very typical. Is the screenwriter was called in, and they said, look, we have a poster. We need a script in a month. That's the only guidance they have. And that's where gold comes from. Anything else?
You touched a little bit on like different books and stuff touching on social issues or deeper. How do you feel like, beyond wanting to entertain people and share entertainment, is there a way that you want to engage with people or deeper issues that you feel passionate about?
Yeah, I definitely found at a certain point, and especially when I came to Goddard and started using that as a criteria and looking at what I'm writing, is that I really do want to communicate stuff, my own views on spirituality, theology, which as an atheist, my views on spirituality and theology are quite interesting, but not dismissive. And I know that because I've delved into that, and social issues too. The society versus the individual is a very strong theme of mine, which kind of probably dates back to my issues with bullying. So there's a lot of trying to communicate, but I feel like I'm not trying to communicate answers as much as posing questions or just continuing the dialogue. So that would be the communication part of my writing.
How far along into this book are you, and do you have any thoughts on publishing?
I'm
when that's going to happen?
I got the first 110 pages. I plan to crank out the rest of it, which I all have plotted in my head this year. And I'm hopefully looking for publishing at the end of the year or next year, depending on how the revision process goes and everything. It's new to me. It's my first full-length novel, so it's definitely a new experience. But with the tutelage of Lori Foos and Michael Fishai and Michael Leone. I really felt comfortable with this and feel like I could accomplish it.
I want someone to know when that happens.
I'll let Goddard know.
It'll be in the newsletter.
And what name will you be using?
I'll speak with S. Michael Wilson. I like the pretentious first initial. Yeah, and I did that to separate Scott Wilson's very common name. And think about that kind of stuff when you're picking your writing name, because the one problem I have is I get a lot of people calling me Michael because of the S. And then I had the problem where people didn't know this was my presentation.
Yeah, I
Scott.
actually went through that. I was like, who's that?
Yeah, my bad. Sorry about that.
You did your job. You confused.
I'm going to wrap it up. So I thank you, everybody, for staying a bit longer than we planned on for the right time.